Hello and welcome to this episode of the Curiosity Key podcast. I'm joined with the amazing Sophie Walker from Disposal. Welcome, Sophie. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Charlie. I'm really excited to be here.
Brilliant. So I have just had to refrain from talking about your company name in a way. It's always one of those things, isn't it? When you just say, right, okay, how do you pronounce this to make sure that I'm not doing any errors? And you say, don't do this. And then that's all you can think about.
Well, you nailed it. You said it exactly right. So
Disposal. Well, it's brilliant to have you on the podcast because I know that you are in the very sort of niche industry of waste technology. And one of my earlier podcast guests, Michael Groves of Topolytics, is somebody that's also known to you. And before we get started, I'm just keen to tell our listeners who you are and just tell us a little bit about Disposal as well.
Sure. So yes, I'm Sophie. I'm the COO and co-founder of Disposal, along with my fiance and co-founder Tom. And really, it was his idea. He used to work in the waste industry, and then we both quit our jobs and went cycle touring around North America for like 9 months. And I was loving the scenery and enjoying pedaling and could have done it for years, I think. And Tom spent the whole time missing working in an office and trying to solve the problems of his previous job, and kind of came up with the idea for Disposal as a sort of initial concept at that point. And then when we came home, we asked people that he'd worked with whether they thought it was a good idea, and everyone said, oh yeah, no, it's a great idea, but it exists already. So Tom was like, oh, fantastic, I just want to go and work for those people. That sounds like my dream job. So we spent ages trying to find it and we couldn't find it. And so then we went back to those people who said it was a good idea and said, well, you know, if it doesn't exist, should it exist? And everyone went, oh yeah, you should totally do that. And so despite neither of us ever having any desire to start a business or, you know, be entrepreneurial, we set about figuring out how to do that. And so that's when I sort of came on board. That was in, when was that? Early 2017. And we started figuring out, I mean, we set the company up in 2016 in a kind of initial version, but as most of these things happen, you kind of go slightly down the wrong route and then go, oh no, that doesn't quite work. And I wouldn't say it was a pivot exactly, but a kind of slight change of direction. And then yeah, I came on board early 2017, and then we quit our jobs again in the summer of 2017. It's almost the anniversary, and went full time. And yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, if I'm honest, but it's super interesting and exciting and really hard work. But yeah.
What a great story.
I haven't told you what we do yet. But yeah.
No, but it's like you don't usually hear anybody talk about going cycling around America desperate to get back to the office job. So it must be a really big problem. So I'm keen to know, what was that problem that he was desperate to solve?
So yeah, so he spent about 6 or 7 years, I think it was, in the industry. He'd done a couple of years with local authorities, doing sort of door knocking, going and speaking to, you know, householders about improving their recycling rates or implementing like food waste recycling systems. And then he moved from that to a hazardous waste company in Sheffield, and assumed that all of the information that he'd had at his kind of disposal when he was doing the household waste job would be even more sort of available for hazardous waste, because it's even more regulated and scary and horrible stuff, right? But when he started looking into it, he realised that actually there was not very much information available, and what there was pretty impenetrable and hard to kind of understand. And he had tons of, like, he was a sales coordinator, and he had loads of customers basically asking him for loads of advice, ringing up in a panic because they were being audited, getting stressed out because, you know, they didn't have the right documentation or they weren't sure what waste code to use for their waste. And then as a sales coordinator, he was just trying to figure out how to streamline and make efficient the work that he was doing. You know, he spent a huge amount of time literally emailing out these documents to the customers while they were stressing out at him because he hadn't sent them already or whatever. And he's an organized person, and he thought, okay, we'll put them all on the website. That, you know, then people can access them whenever. But they didn't run their website. And so things would invariably go out of date, and it would take them time to get them uploaded, and it was a pain. And so that didn't really work. And he would set loads of notifications because different things would expire at different points, but keeping on top of that was really difficult. And so then you'd have members of staff's training run out for certain things, and then they'd be out of action for days instead of just half a day of refresher training and all of this sort of stuff. And so while we were pedaling, he was just thinking, basically, how do we do this in a more efficient way, in a way that isn't everyone having to do this work over and over and over again? And you kind of create a hub. And so the idea of disposal is this, it's a hub that connects waste producers and waste companies, where that compliance information is in this central repository that is accessible by everybody along the waste supply chain, and that you can then easily keep on top of that compliance, which is otherwise like a super manual, really quite boring and not fruitful task. Like, it doesn't add anything to your bottom line, but there's an enormous amount of box checking that needs to be done if you're going to actually take your compliance for your waste seriously. And so the idea is to just streamline all of that. So we've built a load of automated notifications so that when the documents are coming up to expiry, you're notified in advance, so you can kind of keep on top of that. You can quickly see whether anyone that you're using has let things drop, and so you get a quick color code of kind of red, like don't use these people, danger sort of thing, their insurance is expired or stuff like that. And then we've built a whole load of tools around that to just try and make dealing with waste easier, because waste is something that literally every single one of us deals with. And yet, like, almost nobody understands it. Nobody knows what they're supposed to do. Nobody knows if they're doing it properly. Most people just rely on their waste contractor. And frankly, you only have to look at the headlines to realise that there are lots of people not doing things as they should. And so we think it's important to kind of bring a bit of transparency to the industry and make it easy for anyone to be able to kind of go, oh, actually, I know what happens to my waste and I feel comfortable with that, and potentially make different decisions around it, which hopefully in the long run will make those wastes into resources and enable us to become a sort of more resource efficient economy and society.
That would be amazing. And I totally relate to what you say is about nobody's got any idea what they're doing, because every single council seems to have a different approach to managing waste in terms of what you can put in your recycling bin, what's considered to be contaminated waste and what's not. So there is a lot of things that people don't understand, but also it's one of those that not many people actually talk about, do they?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, because it's one of these things where actually I have to say, I'm new to the industry. I used to work in like food supply chain, so it's not like I'm a kind of lifelong waster, but since being in the industry, I found that actually when you talk to people about it, as long as you don't utter the words waste compliance, which just means people glaze over and run away, if you talk to people about waste or rubbish or recycling, everyone gets dead het up about it. Actually, everyone's got something of it, like, oh, I don't know why my council doesn't take X, or oh, when I go to visit my mum, they've got this and it's brilliant, but they don't have that in where I live. Or everybody's got something. Or like people, I've even had people like confess about being done for fly tipping, which they'd done totally unwittingly, like, so not what they thought. They'd moved out of a house, they had a load of stuff, they'd intended to take it to the tip was closed, so they had all these bags of stuff, so they just drove around and carefully left one bag next to each litter bin that they found, thinking that they were being responsible, but they had identifiable information in it. The council found them and fined them for fly tipping. So it's and like, again, that's another example of somebody thinking that they're doing the right thing and clearly not. And so you're right, there's a total lack of consistency in terms of household waste and what we're expected to do. But then there's an inconsistency between that and what we do at work. And then there's an inconsistency between that and when we go and visit people at other places, or when we're out and about in terms of recycling on the go. And so it's a really confused picture, and it does mean that people just don't really know. And then you've got all of the stories that you get, like, oh, is all of our stuff just getting sent to Malaysia and dumped in a forest anyway, so what's the point? And so there's just so much misinformation and there's so much confusion, and I just think that all of that basically has led to what, we have, I was going to say stagnating recycling rates, but actually I think they've declined slightly. And so because I think people just get sort of apathetic about it and think, well, what's the point? I don't understand what's going on. I don't know how to do the right thing, and I don't even know whether if I do the right thing it ends up where it should. So I'm just
and you're getting that, like, why bother? Unfortunately, I'm battling with certain people that I know that are like, yeah, well, what's the point? It's, not being recycled anyway, so why even bother? And you're like, oh no, that's not the right attitude.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So tell me a bit about no experience in business, no intention to be in business, yet you have this tech business. How did you get involved in that, and what was your process, if you like?
So, I mean, this sounds like a joke, but honestly, we listened to the startup podcast.
Love it.
All right, cool. We get this. We know how to build a company from scratch. Well, yeah. So we listened to that. We listened to loads of podcasts in the early days. All of those sort of ones around having a super duper tech companies. And actually, in lots of ways, I've kind of moved away from them. I think just we've evolved in our thinking and how we want to do stuff, and actually we're not in this to be a typical startup. We don't want to grow the company really big and exit. That's not what we're interested in. Like, we care about this deeply and we want to make a difference. And Tom says that he imagines retiring from this company in years and years. I'd like to retire early and go pedaling again, but still not anytime soon. So basically we just listened to a lot of stuff. We talked to tons of people. We openly admitted we had no idea what we were doing and would accept advice from anyone that would give it to us, essentially. And then over time you kind of start to, I think, having to be slightly more, you have to filter it a little bit. You kind of have to start going, actually, I'm not sure that's as good advice, and I'm going to, be polite and say thanks very much, not actually do it. And then you kind of gravitate towards the people that give you good advice and that have been supportive, and and you kind of latch onto them and keep them around. So I think that was probably the most useful thing early on, was just gathering as much information as possible and growing our network and just talking to people and admitting we didn't know what we were doing. Because I think when you I think that came out of the cycle touring, actually, because the thing about cycle touring is you put yourself out there and you're vulnerable, right? You're on your bike, you've got everything with you, it's totally self-supported, just the two of us, and we would end up in all sorts of odd places, and people would come to us and be like, oh my gosh, where have you come from? Where are you going? Do you want to come and stay at my house and I'll feed you? And we'd say yes, and it was great. And I think if you put yourself out there and you kind of admit to being, a bit vulnerable and not knowing everything, I think mostly people actually want to help you. And that for me was probably the biggest surprise around business. I always, you see things like The Apprentice or whatever, and it just seems like such a bunch of terrible people, to not swear. And I just thought business was full of like backstabbing, greasy, money grabbing, awful people. And actually in this journey, what I've realized is no, it's full of all lovely, normal people that inhabit every other part of the world as well. And of course, there are some awful people in it, but mostly it's nice people trying to get on with their lives and happy to help each other out and be nice and supportive. And so yeah, that's been a real surprise and has been a real, I think, like, encouragement, like if it had been all backstabby and awful, I think we would have just probably run away. But
Gone cycling again.
Well, maybe, yeah. Tom's still not really up for more pedaling, but I'm definitely for it. But yeah, I think also, I mean, the fact that we quit our jobs and went cycle touring, and then just before we went full time on the business, we went sea kayaking, touring around northern Norway with no experience for like 3 weeks. And I mean, we nearly died repeatedly. That wasn't something I would recommend, but I think it kind of goes to show that I am a fairly I have a high risk appetite, and I'm up for sort of jumping in with both feet in the deep end. But I think that part of that, the reason we're in a really privileged position to be able to do that, we when we went full time on the business, we moved in with my auntie and uncle, because we can pay the minimal rent, and I know they won't kick us out, and we won't end up homeless if the business all fails. You know, we don't have any kind of normal overheads that people have in terms of mortgages and stuff. We don't have kids, we don't have pets, so we're able to devote our time to it. And I think we're in an incredibly privileged position to be able to do that. So we're lucky, really. I mean, we work really hard, but we're lucky with it.
You've made a lot of sacrifices as well, you know, especially if you want to kind of travel the world and, you know, cycle around everywhere. I can definitely relate to wanting to do something like that and having a partner that doesn't quite share your enthusiasm for these things. We did Everest Base Camp a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first trip that my other half had ever done. He didn't like traveling. It wasn't really a big hiker, didn't like any of that stuff. And I was just like, you know what, I'm going to go and do that. We can delay the wedding and do all of this stuff. And he was just like, okay, can I come?
Wow.
But what you're saying is it's all the characteristics of entrepreneurs. You know, you've got grit, you've got determination, you're very resilient, and like you just said, a high appetite for risk, and also willing to put yourself out there, which I think a lot of people are afraid of doing. So I hope for people listening to this thinking you've got to go it alone, you can't accept help from anybody else, or you don't want to go and ask for help, then, you know, the more you can get used to asking for help, the more you will realize that there are people out there that are willing to help you and that have a lot of really good advice to share.
Definitely. And I think also that, I mean, this was one of the lessons we learned on the cycle tour, was that if someone offers you help, you know, accept it. If you want it, accept it. Like, they're not offering to be nice. Like, take them at their word and trust that if they're offering it, they mean it. And so, and I think, you know, it's quite a British trait to sort of, you know, someone says, oh, do you need help with that? I could do blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, no, don't worry, I'm fine. When really you're drowning and desperately need help. So I would say, you know, it is uncomfortable to start with, but you get used to it. And actually, you know, people want to help, and I think they get stuff out of it too. And so, yeah, I would say definitely just ask for help and then accept help that is offered if it's help that's useful to you.
So I am keen to know, because I love what you were saying, that you just sort of poured into all of the podcasts out there about starting a tech company and doing all these things. How was the reality of starting a tech company different to what the podcasts were telling you?
Oh God, like so different. I mean, some of them kind of explained some of the ups and downs of it, right? And I think that was one of the things that I liked about the first series of Startup, was that there were those really candid conversations about equity and stuff between Alex and Matt, like the founders or whatever. And I thought those sorts of things were really, they were illuminating to us in terms of thinking, yeah, these are difficult conversations that may come up. And I mean, Tom and I are lucky that we do have separate shares or equity in the business, but like, I mean, we're essentially almost a single entity, so it's not super difficult in that sense. But I think that it's, for me, as I was saying, like that the journey that a lot of those startups are on is about, it's become this new kind of dream, right? It's almost like the kind of the fame dream of like, oh, I'm going to start a tech company and it's going to be massive and I'm going to sell it to Google and then I'm going to retire with millions of quid in the bank. And you know, and clearly there are a few examples that is what happens. And if that's what you're going for, then, you know, good luck to you if that's what your dream is. But I think for us, like I said, it's just, the more I listened to those things, it just became really clear that like our ambitions for the business and that kind of tech startup path were not the same thing at all. And so I think it feels really different when it's something that it genuinely is mission driven and values driven. And it's not, those aren't marketing things for us. They're not something that we've done because it'll mean that we get, you know, to tick a box somewhere, or someone wants to work with us because it meets their CSR requirement or something. Like, it's what actually matters to us. And I think that for us has meant that sometimes business wise, commercial kind of business wise, I don't think we've accelerated at the same pace that we might have done if we'd been completely focused on profit, or on growing the business. Like, we've taken a slightly more meandering route, and we've kind of basically we're really just trying to solve the problem, and some of the stuff that we're trying to do is really so beyond the kind of the remit of a tiny startup. I mean, some of the stuff we're trying to do is literally alter the kind of infrastructure of how we manage waste data for the whole country and potentially globally, right? As in, these are big, should be kind of government projects, and I think it's sort of weird that we're in that sphere and trying to make a difference with that, and it's not very profitable, it certainly seems to me, but I think it's so important, because actually there's not that many people thinking about it as hard as we are, it seems like, and there's not that many people who care about it as much as we do. And so why shouldn't it be us? If we care about it as much as we do and we want to really fix the problem, why shouldn't it be us that works on it? So and that just isn't the sort of story that you seem to see in a lot of the kind of the startup stories. It's always just about hustling really hard, like making the sales, and I don't know, I think that stuff is clearly important in terms of being financially viable for any length of time, but it's almost like it's just the means to the end for us, I think. Yeah.
It's interesting that you do say that, because I think I was having a few conversations recently about how purpose-driven, mission-driven companies, especially through the whole COVID-19 situation, appear to have a much more positive, opportunistic mindset going through it than companies that are just driven by profit, because they're willing to just sort of say, right, okay, well, here's the problem that we're trying to solve. We've got this limitation, we can't do this, this, and this, but how else can we try and solve this problem with what we have available? And just from looking at the mission-driven businesses and the purpose-driven businesses talking on social media, putting themselves out there, it's been really lovely to see, because everybody that I have on my podcast is all driven by purpose, all driven by mission. And it's, we need more people like you in the world, and we need more people that are looking to solve those big problems and looking to, make the world a better place. So it's great to hear you say that. And I don't think it's all about hustle and grind. And I don't know, I seem to think that a lot more people are talking about the fact that that isn't the way to do it. There are other ways of doing it. There's sacrifice, and then there is sacrifice, and it's understanding what's going to work for you. So I'm glad that you said that. That's really, it's really nice to know. But also, for anybody listening to this and not watching the video, it's like, sort of Sophie's like just got so enthusiastic when she's talking about the problems that she's solving. And it's just really, that's why I love doing this, because it's so great to speak to people that are just doing what drives them, and, sort of solving these problems that nobody else is necessarily looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I mean, clearly in some ways we are really weird, but like we're not driven by the money. Like, I mean, if I was, I would have just stayed in my old job. I earn hardly anything at the moment, and that, that's okay for me, because I don't have very many outgoings and I'm not that bothered about it. But I think, the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is the fact that this matters. Like, we have a global waste crisis, and we are frittering away these finite resources in the most spectacular fashion. And I like, no amount of salary, I don't think, would equate to actually, feeling like I'm doing something that might help solve that problem. And clearly we're not going to solve it on our own. It's an incredibly interconnected, huge, wicked problem, but it feels really exciting to play a part of that. And I want to play a part in that. And I want to put my effort and my time into doing something that matters. And so I think that it's a much bigger motivator than just clearly salary. At least it is for me and for Tom. So
brilliant. And so tell me a little bit, because you touched on it before, that you set out on this journey to solve this problem, but then you change direction. So you said it wasn't necessarily a pivot, but it was a change of direction. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So so initially, when Tom started thinking about what he wanted to do, what's interesting to me is Tom's vision for what he wanted disposal to be hasn't changed. It's what we've done is, if you like, we've kind of tacked with the wind in terms of the approach of getting here, because the waste industry is so behind in terms of software tech development stuff, right? I mean, it is, I think the term is digitally immature, and so you can't just rock up and go, hey, we've got this amazing blockchain AI blah blah blah, because they just have no idea what you're talking about. Some people Tom used to work with someone who still did everything on a typewriter. They paid a full-time typist. Like, I mean, it's mind-blowing, right? So you can't just go from where we are to that. You need a journey, right? You need to bring all of those companies along, however small they are. And so essentially what we've done is we've tried to find the paving stones to make that path along the way. So the first thing that Tom's idea was that just when we came back from cycling, the Environment Agency, the regulator, changed the way that hazardous waste consignment note codes were created. So previously you had to register with the agency and they gave you a number, and then it was like, oh no, you create it yourself, but it has to be unique and it has to follow this pattern, which means it was a bad idea. But the initial thing that we built was basically a very simple but a consignment note code creator that meant that at least in your company you could create unique codes that meant that you were meeting the requirements of the Environment Agency. And so that was the first thing that we built, because it was like, there's a problem that's just happened in legislation, no one really knows how to deal with it, and we can build a very basic piece of tech that can meet that requirement. And we sort of took that around to people, and a few people were sort of interested and used it a little bit, but it was too small. It was just a tiny piece of the problem. And so it just kind of didn't really go anywhere. And then Tom was wanting to build the directory of the licensed waste companies, and so he did a freedom of information request to the Environment Agency for like all of the licensed waste companies in the country, and they said, no, we're not sending you that, but you can use our API, which we had no idea existed, but it's way better than a single data dump from them. And so we went and we found the API, and it was brilliant. And then we basically made contact with the data people at the Environment Agency, and we've been kind of friendly with them ever since. We're one of the only people that still uses that API. We were the first people to use it. And so we built this directory. And again, the thing about the directory is that a directory needs a ton of traffic for people to kind of feel like it's worth investing their time or effort in, right? And so that's really hard to do when you've literally just launched. We launched in March 2018 with the directory, and we'd get dead excited if we had like a few hundred users in the month. And now, because we've built it well with SEO, time has kind of gone on, and with the stuff with COVID, with the household waste recycling centres closing and opening and people not knowing what's going on, our traffic has gone like through the roof. So we had over 20,000 visitors last month. So it's grown a lot. And I think that we're possibly one of the most visited like waste specific sites in the country, which is sort of weird. But again, the directory still is not something that is hugely kind of profit generating, because until you can kind of show that there's a load of business coming through it, the people listing in it don't want to pay you for it. And so although that initially we were thinking that people would kind of pay to have a listing, that didn't really work out. And so then we sort of started building out the kind of the compliance tools, which were always going to be part of the product, but we saw it as the next paving stone, if you like. And so when we started building those out, we sort of started getting a bit more interest from customers. And then in talking to those customers, we changed the way they worked a little bit and tweaked them for their needs. And now I think those sort of compliance products that we've got like a semi-automated audit tool, like those notifications that I was telling you about. You basically follow the waste companies that you use, so that that they're like in your dashboard. And you can create a waste map and see where your waste goes and things like that. And those tools have sort of seem to be really resonate with people. And we brought on a commercial director at the end of last year, and that now seems to be kind of, she's talking about it in a much better way than Tom and I are not salespeople. That's another bit of advice I would say, is like, know what your strengths and weaknesses are and find people to plug the gaps. So yeah, that seems to be working a lot better now. And I think, one of our strengths is that we're a tech company, and that means that we have a developer in-house. Some of the other, we've had a few competitors spring up over the last couple of years since we launched, and most of them don't have developers in-house, and I don't know how they're going to cope, right? Because it's so expensive to keep going to a third party to update things. And the thing about tech is it always needs updating. It's never finished. And so I think that's one of our real strengths. We've got an amazing developer who is just great. We got him straight out of university, and he's just made disposal his own. And so I think so like I said, it's not that we've pivoted, it's essentially that we kind of have to figure out what the next step is that will bring people along, and that people will be able to understand where we're going, because people outside of the industry just can't believe that this infrastructure doesn't exist digitally to do with waste. And then people in the industry don't understand how it might digitally exist because they're not kind of tech savvy. And so there's a lot of education to be done. That's a really big part of what we seem to be having to do. So we educate in terms of digital stuff, we educate in terms of waste compliance, we educate in terms of how to bring those two things together, and how to build kind of the really basic foundations of allowing a whole industry to go through that kind of digital transformation. So there's a lot of work for 4 people.
Yes, it is really difficult. I mean, I work with a lot of companies that they're trying to solve big problems, but the clients that have these problems aren't necessarily aware that they have these problems, or it's not a big enough priority for them to fix it. So when you're in that situation, it does take a lot longer, and there is a huge education piece around it, because you have to meet them where they're at. Otherwise, you're just going to come up to a lot of resistance, and people are just going to be like, oh, who's that crazy person talking to me about this again?
Exactly.
And it's
I think
great.
that I was just going to say, sorry, on that you're so right. Like, part of our issue is that in organizations, the people who have the problem, people who manage waste compliance in the organizations that have somebody that does that, they're not the purse string holders, whatever the phrase is. And so we convince that literally every compliance person we've shown our tools to are like, oh my God, I love this. This makes my life so much easier. I love it. But then you go to the finance director or whatever, and they're like, I don't really get it. And we've got, Sharon or whoever who does it. So what's the problem? And it's like, well, Sharon's pulling her hair out and having a complete nightmare, and, ends up having to have interviews under caution with the Environment Agency, which are really uncomfortable and not nice. Like, yeah, but how much is it? We don't have a budget for that, because we've never bothered to spend any money on it. And it's like, so for us, trying to figure out how do we frame it, and how do we present it to a really broad group, not only of different organizations and companies, because everyone creates waste, but within those organizations and companies, all the different stakeholders that you have to then convince that what you've got is good and worth paying for. It's hard.
So that's where I get a bit geeky, because that's why I love the sort of B2B space more than the B2C space. Because I don't know, I always look at B2C and I'm just like, it's like you're just trying to persuade somebody that they want something. Whereas B2B is so much more interesting, because I get a bit geeky about it, because I'm like, right, okay, well, you've got the user over here and they've got these needs and desires. And then you've got the purse holder over here that they just don't care about what that person wants. They just care about this. So it's just like, how do you piece it all together and put the right messaging in towards the right person? Because it is exactly that. It's like the people that are spending the budgets, allocating the budgets, they don't care about the day to day. And it's such a shame that something bad has to happen before people start to realize that actually these things do need to be prioritized. Because I'm working with a few people at the moment that are kind of in the mental health space. So especially with COVID, there's a huge amount of anxiety of people coming back to work, and people are like, well, I'm so bogged down, I need to make redundancies, I need to do this, this and this. And it's like, well, if you don't do this, this and this that you don't care about, you could be sued, or, you know, like members of your team could commit suicide, like, you know, God forbid. And you don't want that, but people don't necessarily think about all of these things until it happens, or it happens to somebody that they know. So it's like, right, okay, how can you talk about it in a way? Yeah, I get quite geeky about all of this stuff. I love it. But we digress.
No, I mean, they're interesting problems to solve, right? And I think, again, I'm so pleased to have like our commercial director on board now, because her brain works much better like that. And that is really helpful for us, because like I said, Tom and I, that's not our strong suit. And so it's nice to have someone who kind of, yeah, thinks about it in that way and wants to dive into it in the way that you clearly are passionate about doing.
Yeah, you need to find people that get excited about this sort of challenge, but just in the same way that we need people like you and Tom that get get excited about solving these problems, because I wouldn't even know where to start with things like that. But it's such good advice that you do need to acknowledge where your strengths are and your limitations. I think too many people focus on weaknesses, but it's not a weakness if you've never done it before. Like, just acknowledge that it's not your thing and get somebody else where it is their thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, and then value those people for bringing something to the team that isn't, what you're good at, and try not to see it as a sort of what's the right word? Like, it's not a threat. Like, you should employ people who are better than you if you can, and not be threatened by that, I think, and actually just celebrate the fact that there's other people who can pick up the balls that you are clearly dropping. So.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Great advice there. So you talked a little bit about SEO and the fact that you went from a couple of hundred people to 20,000 people last month, which is huge. Do you have any advice that you want to share to anybody watching this thinking, I would love that many visitors to my website?
Oh my God, honestly, so I'm not that person, that's Tom. And Tom seems to, he's not done this sort of thing before, but he seems to have been born with some sort of weird innate knowledge of how Google works, which is brilliant for us. But I think probably in layman's terms, the biggest thing we've done is create useful content. So we have a Waste Thesaurus, which is kind of what it sounds like. So when you classify waste, which you have to do when it's taken away from a commercial business, property, you have to give it a classification code, a European waste catalogue code number. Nobody really knows what they are, and they're all written in kind of technical language, so it wouldn't have anything, you wouldn't be able to find, like office waste or sofa or I don't know, food waste or whatever in it. And so what Tom's done is spent a lot of time putting keywords against those EWC codes, so you can search for those items and you can find, it'll help you basically narrow down to the appropriate code that you need. And that's freely available. We just put that on the website. We've got information around whether the item's hazardous or not, and all of that kind of stuff is just there. And that is, until the whole household waste recycling centre thing happened with COVID, the Waste Thesaurus was by far the most used tool that we have built, and used by people all over the world, like as in everywhere. It's really bonkers, especially considering it's European. I don't know why someone in Venezuela or Bangladesh or Australia are looking at it, but they are. So, happy days. And I don't think another one exists like it anywhere, actually. So I think, again, that's why it gets used a lot. But I mean, Tom meticulously went through and did a whole load of, like meta descriptions and tags and stuff, which I do not understand at all, I'm afraid. But I guess it's just, if that's something that's important to you, create content that people will find useful, and then make sure you do the tedious stuff of like tagging it so that Google can read it and Google can find it, basically. Because if you don't play that game, then it doesn't matter how useful it is, no one will find it. So That's
really
not super
valuable
helpful advice.
No, it is. It's really valuable advice. And I think a lot of people sometimes lose sight of that and think, well, okay, I just want to write content on my website of what I want people to know or what I'm interested in saying, without necessarily considering, right, okay, who am I targeting and what are they interested in? What are they searching for? So write useful content, exactly what you were saying. That is what's going to make the biggest difference. And then, like you just said, add the right tags and the right keywords where required. And there's a lot of information online about how to do that. It just is quite a tedious task.
yeah.
But if you can get into the habits of starting to do that as you get going, then it just becomes a lot easier, and just habit, so you don't even think about it.
Yeah, definitely, I think so. And then monitoring it so you can see what's working and what's not, and which articles that you're writing or which pages that you've created actually get that traffic. Because almost honestly, we didn't do the Waste Thesaurus thinking it would be a huge driver of traffic. We did it because it was something that Tom used to spend a lot of time faffing around trying to find that information out. And so we're just like, well, we'll just build it and it'll be automatic, it'll be automated and it'll help people. But using Google Analytics and having a look at what people are looking at, we just noticed that was clearly the thing that's getting used the most. And so we've continued to develop it. We can, and the more people use it, the more we're able to learn what people are searching for and what people don't find answers for. And we just there's nothing clever about it in the sense that I'm sure other people might go, oh, machine learning, blah blah. There's just not enough data for that yet. So at the moment it's just Tom.
I love it. And yeah, you make another good point as well. It's like, what are people searching for too? Because you can have as much useful content on your website as possible, but if nobody's searching for that particular type of content, then they're never going to find it, and they're never going to sort of come across it. And even the best type of optimizing, SEO on your website is not going to get people there. So yeah, you need to make sure that you are creating content around what people are searching for. So very good point there. I realize as well, like we are like getting up to time now, and I could talk to you for ages about this because it's all very fascinating. But I just wanted to ask, like, what's the future for disposal? Like what's coming up?
Oh, it's exciting. So there's lots of good stuff happening for us at the moment. And I think, we're lucky that in a way, COVID-19 has forced a lot of companies. I mean, it's been bad for the waste industry in lots of ways. And there are many businesses that are kind of hibernating, waiting for industry to kind of come back and, for our economy to sort of open up again. But those that are still functioning, I think, have noticed that maybe software and digital things can be useful. And so we're getting some more inquiries, and people seem to be kind of more open to kind of digital solutions. So that's been really positive for us. And we're lucky that it's easy for us to work from home and that we can work remotely, and that's not a problem. So we've kind of weathered that bit fairly well, and I'm really pleased about that. And then we've had a few really exciting projects kind of in the pipeline that look like they're going to kick off really soon, and that is great. I mean, in some ways people probably say that it's not good advice to kind of say yes to lots of things and open lots of doors, but I also find that as long as they are in some way aligned with what you're doing, it's allowed us, projects we've done before have allowed us to build new modules, have allowed us to kind of learn loads of new things. And so we're kind of always open to collaborating and looking for ways to do new interesting things with interesting people. So that's kind of, there's a lot of that stuff happening at the moment. And we've just at the beginning of this year, we founded a social enterprise because one business isn't enough hard work. So because we've realized that essentially, because everybody creates waste, but you can't talk to everybody in the same way. So disposal is going to be our kind of B2B, kind of very kind of compliance-led organization. And then your disposal is our social enterprise, and it's going to be all around helping individuals and kind of micro businesses to deal with really basic waste stuff. So like, where's my household waste recycling center, or what can I take to my tip, or what should I do if I need to clear out my shed and I need to find an appropriate licensed waste service. So and that, I think those sorts of issues are the same sorts of questions that tiny businesses ask as well, where they're not in a position to have like a kind of proper waste contract. And so again, it's like just guiding those people in a way that is just about giving really useful information. And that social enterprise bit is where we see the kind of the data infrastructure building as well. So because we don't think those sorts of assets should be owned by a private company that's driven by one day hopefully making good profit, and that those should be held, in trust for society and for the environment. And so we're looking at building some open data standards around waste, and around building kind of really just the fundamental foundations that we think are important for the industry to be able to digitalize. And so all of that sits under the Your Disposal bit as well. So, and we've got some exciting projects happening for them as well. So it just feels like a really good time for us. It's been a lot of hard work over the last few months, years, but I think it's just that there's an opportunity right now where I think people have kind of opened their eyes to digitalization, and there's been enough kind of disruption in the industry that things have to change, and not just in the industry, right, across society. And I think people are looking at ways we can do things better, and I hope that we can be part of that, like, build it back better whole thing that's going on. So yeah, exciting times.
Wow, you definitely have been busy, and I can't wait to hear about your progress and all the amazing things that you're doing, and will continue to do, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Definitely. No, I have every confidence that you'll go on to do amazing things. So if anybody, I'm sure we'll have lots of people listening to this that think, all right, I want to get involved. You may find that people want to collaborate with you or help you in any way. Like, what's the best way to contact you and get in touch?
So we're pretty active on Twitter. So you can find us on there. So I'm at Sophie_Koo, COO, or at Your Disposal, and disposal is without the I. So YOURDSPOSAL. Or you can email me. So it's Sophie, SOPHIE, at yourdisposal.uk.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So Twitter is your platform of choice.
Course. Our website, which is disposal.uk. But yeah, so.
I will be linking to all of these things in the show notes, so don't worry about that. And I was very tempted to say the company name in the way that you told me not to. Told you it was a bad idea. Never tell somebody that they can't say something because that's all you want to say. Oh, well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Hopefully in the future we'll get you back on again and you can talk about more of the good stuff that you're working on. And I wish you all the success for the future.
Oh, honestly, thanks so much for having me on. It's been really fun, and I love talking rubbish. So.
I love it. I love talking rubbish. Great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.